Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now we are reviewing The Bear Season 3, and today we are on Episode 3 titled Doors. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. Okay, Sarah, hit us with an IMDb or Hulu summary for Episode 3 of this latest season.
The staff slogs through a month of service.
Slogs. Yeah, the understatement of the century.
It's so good. I would like to advocate for more people to use the word slog in their writing. It is so effective, so evocative, and is a great way to describe what the characters are feeling in this episode. So,
yeah,
well done, summary writers.
Yeah. I will. The episode summaries for The Bear are always on point, and the season does not disappoint. Okay. In TV and Us tradition, we start off with our episode titles of choice for each of our review discussions for the episode. So, Sarah, what is your episode title for this episode?
My title is Burritos.
Nice. I love it. I love it. The Richie charm is doing its thing.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yep. My episode title is Dystopian Butter.
Yes. Yeah, we encounter some dystopian butter in this episode.
Yep. A lot of other dystopian things that are not going so smoothly for this crew. Okay. Let's dive in with our thoughts about episode 3. This should be a fun and exciting discussion. Tell me your thoughts about this episode.
Yeah, I think that this episode comes at an interesting point in the season because, as we talked about with the first 2 episodes, those felt a little bit different than what we're accustomed to in The Bear. And I'm finding the progression of this season really interesting because the first episode felt so different. Like it was just kind of zen, but also melancholy at the same time. There were moments of tension, but it really was like easing us back into the chaos of The Bear. And then the second episode creates tension just primarily by talking. And so, you're getting more acclimated to The Bear again. And then here we are with episode 3, and we are fully in the kitchen. It's absolute madness and chaos. We're seeing all of the things that you would expect from The Bear, all present here in this episode. And I find it really interesting the way that this episode is constructed. And I'm sure that there's a lot to talk about with that, starting with the funeral and Marcus's eulogy. And then we transition right into the madness of a month of service. And then one other thing that I found really interesting while watching is the score and the music choices in this episode, particularly when they're in the kitchen. They're pulled from symphonies, and I found that so interesting, that how the music complements what's going on, and you have these really beautiful like soaring string melodies going on, but there's also these like really, really like melancholy or even ominous turns in the music as you're watching this chaos unfold. And just seeing at first when they're in the kitchen, it is this like pageantry, and you see people they're in their places and they're hitting their marks and things are happening. But then over the course of the episode, that really starts to devolve as things get more insane. And the way that the show is able to just create tension and keep ratcheting it up in a way that keeps you engaged and doesn't make you check out is just really impressive. So we see a lot of really excellent things happening in this episode. And I am, just growing more and more impressed with the show. And I'm interested to see how this season continues to progress along the trajectory set by these 3 episodes. I think it's going to be interesting to see.
Yes, very much so. It's amazing because we've seen The Bear in its previous seasons do an episode like this, stressful kitchen dynamics. We've seen that a million times before in the show, and yet it brings something fresh and new and exciting and thrilling in the third episode of this third season. And just when you thought like you kind of understood the Bear's groove and how it tackles showcasing what a stressful and chaotic kitchen dynamic can look like, it's doing it again, but in a very, very different way with different stylized components to it. I love that you mentioned the score because I think the score is such fun framing for this whole episode and really accompanies everything that we're seeing visually. The juxtaposition and contrast and dissonance that we feel seeing these beautiful soaring orchestral moments, and visually what we're seeing is like dollops of plates falling and sauce flying and cuts and blood gushing out from hands that are getting cut in this overflowing dishwasher. Just the cognitive juxtaposition and contrast I thought was so much fun. But it's ironic too because a symphony is truly vibrant collaboration, and every beat is well aligned, and all of the different instruments are working together, and they have their specializations that they're contributing to the larger whole. And it's beautiful when it all comes together, and we're seeing this team, this symphony in the kitchen, really they're not on the same beat. Everyone's stepping on each other's toes, and there's so much clashing that's happening. So I think that like cognitive contrast was also really fun too. One thing that's also fascinating, if we kind of zoom out at the season as a whole so far and contrast it with previous seasons, is I feel like in previous seasons we've often gotten these side groups that will form within an episode that like go off and do their little adventure, or they have a little mini mission within an episode that they're going to tackle. So, and I think it's episode 2 of season 1 or 2, Richie and Carmi go off and there's all these character dynamics that come out. But for a lot of the episode, some of these character pockets and little mini groups are separated from each other, and we get to see them draw out different sides of each other. In both episode 2 and 3 so far of this season, we're really seeing the whole team working together constantly. I would say for most of the episode, we're seeing this group functioning as a whole and all of the character dynamics that are revealed through that. But for the most part, the crew is all together, and that's a different aspect of how the show's episodes have been written in the past, where we've gotten these side quests and smaller groups getting paired off or tripled up into triads together. But for this one, I think the show's really showcasing when this group does come together, the scale and complexity of the relational dynamics also get more complex and different when everyone's colliding with each other. So it'll be fascinating to see if we get something different in episodes 4 and onwards. But so far the trend has been we're getting to see this group really work together as a single unit.
Well, and I think that also really reinforces how much Carmi is harming the group as a whole. And I don't know that you would necessarily feel the effects as much if they were separated. And I think that's another bit of brilliance in the way this season is structured so far. I mean, we're only 3 episodes in, so I don't know. We'll see how this keeps going. But to start with Carmi alone in his own little headspace, incubating this idea, coming up with his non-negotiables, vibrant collaboration with no collaboration, and then seeing how that ripples out. Because in the second episode, it's just theoretical that they're like, no, this is stupid. We don't want this. And then in the third episode, you're seeing the real practical effects and the way that this is harming the servers, it's harming the business's bottom line, it's harming all of the cooks. And you see someone like Tina, who was so strong and so confident, and you see the way that she has been built up over the past 2 seasons, and then in this episode she is doubting herself. And you see Sydney have to step up and like really care for her, and Sid does that so well. But then you're seeing the practical effects of Carmi's theoretical ideas colliding in the world. And I think if they were like split off into little groups, you might not see how systemic his own issues that he's working through have affected everybody else on such a wide scale. And so I'm, like you said, I'm curious to see, because now that's been established, like his own narrow focus, his own I would even say like selfishness in some regards. We've seen how that's affected everybody. So are they going to continue to show us that, or are we going to maybe go deeper into how it's maybe affecting certain individuals more, certain parts of the business more than others? So I'm curious to see where we're going to go next in this kind of unfolding of the effects of Carmi.
The effects of Carmi. Yes. The theme of those first few episodes of the season so far. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is you see multiple different characters in their own conversations with other folks talk about how this is the problem and he's not listening. And you can see that there's this fear that Carmi is leading with, that people also are afraid to speak up, and they feel like it's not being heard. And even if they were to object or offer a different way to accomplish the overall mission, that it's falling on deaf ears. So we see Sugar mention it, we see Richie mention it, we see Sid talking about the effects of this decision on the ripple effects on the rest of the staff. And it's such a antithesis to the vision that Carmi and Sid had at the very beginning of this whole thing, which is to create a different type of culture and community, and to lead with a different set of standards and values that they want to cultivate. And he is really parroting a lot of the same things that he's seen in his toxic kitchen cultures now. He's yelling at people. He's exacting about their mistakes. There's kind of this tunnel vision around perfection at all costs, and oftentimes at the cost of the human. And it's really fascinating to see how much Sydney has not gotten sucked into that at all. In fact, she is noticing and observing the people within her team, her peers, that need something different, need a little bit of encouragement, need patience in a moment, and she's able to give that. So you gave the example perfectly earlier with Sid understanding what Tina needed in that moment to help her calm down a little bit more and feel like she was supported in that moment, versus Carmi's outcome focused way of leading, and some of the costs for the human beings on the team because of that. So it's really neat to see the way that Sid and Carmi, as we've mentioned a lot in the past, both have that drive, both have that ambition, and yet we're seeing them deviate in the ways that they choose to show up for their team and for the people that they care about. And we get to see that on full display in this episode.
And I think a really interesting moment comes kind of earlier in the episode, where it's Sydney and Carmi, and she hands him some like paper or cards or whatever, and he's like, wait, these look different. And she explains that she made the margins bigger because Carmi likes to write in the margins. And I think that scene is so important, because even though Carmi is out here just like unilaterally making decisions that are harmful for the staff, they're harmful for the business, all of that, Sydney is still trying to show him kindness, and she is paying attention to his needs too, even though he is ignoring himself and everybody else around him. And so I think there's so many good Sydney moments throughout this episode, but that is one of my favorites because she is trying to reach out to this person who is in a kind of a self-destructive spiral, and it's this little like beacon of hope, or like this opportunity for him to like come back and be a human again instead of just like a crazed workaholic. So I loved that scene. It's so quick, it's so little, but I think it's really, really meaningful, especially in this episode.
And you get to see Carmi kind of respond in the moment as well, of being surprised and touched and moved, but like also we got the next task to do, so we can't dwell on it too long, but you see his reaction, and it's a really sweet moment. And one thing that we touched on briefly earlier, but I think is so significant to the way that this episode is written, is the framing of Marcus's eulogy at his mother's funeral. And he ends his eulogy with this whole bit around how, because they didn't have the ability to speak to each other, they almost were able to see each other more fully because they paid attention to each other. And he talks about how meaningful it was for him to feel seen by her. And then the rest of the episode obviously takes a very different turn in tone, but you see the way that there are moments where even amidst the chaos, these team members are able to see each other, and then also all of the many, many moments where they are not. So there's that really great moment with Sid and Carmi. There's a great moment with Sid really seeing and understanding what Tina needed in a moment. And we also get to see Richie really understanding what Fack needed in a moment where, Carmi's about to chew him out for not serving the guests, and Richie really takes a much more tender, softer approach with him. We've seen Fack also get like anxious and nervous many times in the past before going out there in front of house and being in front of people. And so Richie also seeing and understanding what Fack needed in that very moment. We get to see, buried amidst all of the chaos and all of the yelling in this episode, there are these gem of little moments where this team has moments where they see each other. They're in little pockets, and it's not the overarching culture of this team yet, but they're there. And I thought that framing of what Marcus shares at the beginning of the episode is so important to really understanding kind of the thesis of this third episode.
Yeah, that's so good. And I loved that moment with Richie and Fack. It was just so sweet, especially given how we've seen those two interact before too. There's been a few times throughout this show where they've really gotten in each other's faces and been very unkind to each other. And sometimes it's silly and good-natured, and other times it's kind of scary. But to see that bond continue to grow, and how these two in very different ways are trying to look out for each other is so sweet to see.
It's so great. It's really, really great. And it comes after a whole sequence where Fat goes out there with his little tray.
It's so good.
Pours the whole thing and comes back with the tray. And the way that is shot too is hilarious. The angle of the camera being right in front of a fax tray, that POV shot. So you see his facial expression, you see this little silhouette of the bowls that were supposed to be on the customers' tables, and yet we are returned back into the kitchen with them fully intact still. That was such a great moment. I was cracking up.
And I think that's a perfect example of one of the things that the bear does so well is, this whole episode is pretty stressful, and seeing just the madness in the kitchen, and seeing the fatigue on everybody's faces, and everybody is stressed. But then in the middle, you have these moments where somebody will do something funny. Fack does that, the dystopian butter conversation, like these little moments that are so funny and kind of lighthearted, even whimsical at times. And yet they push the plot forward. because they continue to show the stress that everybody's under based on their reaction to the silly thing, or you get to learn something about a character in that interaction. And I think that that's so brilliant, the way that this show is able to infuse humor, because we need those moments of humor because the show is so stressful, and it gives it to us at the right time in the right way, so that it doesn't feel wasted, but it feels meaningful and purposeful within the episode.
Yeah. No, that's so true. That's so true. And it accomplished, and it's always the right character too. Of course it would be Fack, who is really trying to understand what Carmi's saying. And I think it's also indicative of the lead up to that moment where we've seen all of the characters trying to keep up and learn what the new dish is every day, and they can't really remember or understand or have time to understand it. And so, of course, it's confusing and it's a lot of instructions to figure out, okay, like we pour the broth like this, and then there's these two bowls, but then what, and just how much cognitive overload this team has. And so you kind of empathize with Fack when his brain's stuffed and nothing's going in, when Carmi's also yelling at him. And I think it's a table that is probably already been waiting for a while, and you've got the stress of the customer service dynamics of it too. So it all plays together so perfectly. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite moments in this. I also loved the Fack moment where he shows up with the piñata, and it's great. And I love that we don't fully get to see what happened with the piñata. I mean, obviously, like, they were singing happy birthday, but I loved that moment of the piñata entering the kitchen. Fack is so excited. Carmi is so not having it. And then he just continues on into the into the dining room. It was just perfect. Another like little moment of levity that we needed before we go back to Carmi's terrible chaos menu.
Yep. Well, I know we, for the past 3 episodes, have been seeing some of Carmi's more frustrating sides in him being unhealthy right now. But I loved that this episode is also starting to showcase the way that Richie is perhaps leveraging his strengths, and they're getting a little overextended, maybe. So we have that pinata sequence, and then we also learn later through Sugar around the super soakers that Richie has ordered for the Tuesday surprise. And so we've seen him embrace this, like, we want to make people happy, we want to serve them well, we want to take care of them, all of this stuff around the dining experience and service that he's really caught this really great wave on, and been ignited in finding purpose in it. But we're starting to see the costs of that potentially running rampant and not having clear boundaries or priorities for how that affects their bottom line. And so I think some of those scenes with Sugar and Uncle Jimmy discussing the financials and the revenue and our operational costs, I think is really significant to remember for us as the viewers too. Like, they are running a business. And so when Richie's just ordering all this stuff for these big, moments for the customers, that's really great. But also, how do we balance that with these other very real factors for running the business well so that it can be profitable? So we're also getting to see Richie starting to like run down his direction, and perhaps a little bit too quickly. And it's also getting a little out of line. A lot of that happens off screen, which is really fascinating. I think there's a lot of focus in the kitchen right now, but we get to hear the bits and pieces of some of the shenanigans that him and his team have been up to. And then we also get to see the financial costs of that too. So I think that is setting up some potentially really great moments or confrontations that need to happen. And especially this being a newfound meaning and purpose for him. How will Richie react when Sugar maybe has some pointers or guidelines that need to be implemented for his strengths, his part of this whole endeavor?
Well, and I think the other aspect of that is that it's just a big F you to Carmi. So I
Mm.
definitely viewed that more as an escalation of this feud, almost like Richie taking it personally. Maybe that's the wrong way to describe it, but Carmi has kind of like hijacked the restaurant and is leading in kind of like a dictatorial fashion and screwing up menus and affecting everybody else and isn't listening to anybody and isn't listening to Richie. And so since front of house is his domain, he can mess with Carmi too. And so I wonder if there's a little like vindictiveness in that, or a
Mm.
little trying to like get back at Carmi in all of his fun. And he's doing it in this really like fun, whimsical way, but also maybe doing it to annoy Carmi.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some very real cost to it because poor Sugar's having to deal with and pick up the pieces
Yeah.
of
Ugh.
the chaos that these two grown men acting like children are trying to sort out their own feelings towards each other right now. And her and Uncle Jimmy are having to like really work the numbers, and the numbers don't lie.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that the show went there, because that was kind of my first thought when Carmi just out of the blue redesigns a whole menu and then says that we're going to have a different menu every day. I'm like, well, there goes your little tiny profit margin. So I'm glad that the show is highlighting that, and we already know from the past two seasons Carmi is bad with money and he
Yep.
should not make any financial decision at all. And we're seeing what comes of that because he's not thinking of the money. He's just thinking of one narrow way to achieve his goal, and he can't escape that one train of thought. And we talked about this before, like he's a black and white thinker even though he's very creative, and he can't get himself out of this one frame of mind. And everyone's suffering because of it, including
Mm-hmm.
the budget. The money is not there, and I'm very curious how that is going to continue to impact the rest of the season, and how much more prominent Uncle Jimmy might be and how much more forceful he might become as he continues to lose a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. I don't mind some more Uncle Jimmy moments with his just
Oh my gosh, yes.
him
Please
just
bring
kind of
him on.
barreling through.
Yeah, he's great.
Oh, it's so awesome. But you're right. Like oftentimes, when things get boiled down to, especially when you're running a business, sometimes that is the hard, like reality check that everyone needs to be like, okay, like we can't just be feuding with each other for funsies and ordering super soakers and dystopian butter anymore. Do we want to do this for real or not? And how can that help push the team band to band together? Or does that add stress because it feels like the stakes are higher? So it could go either way. Under pressure, we either join up together and tackle this big mission together, or we tear each other up because we are all fighting each other to try and make our own way to accomplish the mission together. And it's really neat the way when this season is coming and all of this chaos is ensuing, because we've gotten to see this team really work together well. Over the course of season 2, they tackled this seemingly impossible mission together and really understood each other's strengths, created space for them. There was respect for the different expertise and wheelhouses that each person owned. So we got to see some really healthy collaboration between Carmi and Sydney driving on the menu piece, and Sugar driving on timelines and logistics and operations. And they really respected and, could yield to each other in the ways that they needed to. Same thing with Richie with front of house. Then we're seeing them still owning their areas of expertise, but they're clashing and they're arguing. There's a whole scene where Sugar and Carmi are arguing about this, and there's no capacity for them to see the other's perspective yet. But we know this team can do it. And I think that's what's really fun too, is we know what this team is capable of. We've seen them band together to do something really hard and seemingly impossible, but they pulled it off. So we have faith in them as viewers, and we're right now at a low, but we're gonna figure it out potentially. And the fun part is seeing how they do it, how they come together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm more pessimistic just naturally than you are. And I'm like, are they going to come together? I don't know, man.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to end this season maybe in a bit of a low point and
Mm.
maybe some rifts form? Like because we know there's going to be another season after this. So like,
Yeah.
is it going to end on a low? And that's just
Yeah.
what I like keep wondering is how far is this going to go?
Mm.
How isolated is Carmi going to become? How damaged are these relationships going to end up? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not good right now in the bear. It
Yeah.
could get a lot worse. It could get a lot better. And we're going to be along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much so. And what's interesting too is like there's the relationships between the characters, but there's also the relationship that the character has with themselves, which I think is really interesting. So we talk about this a lot in the context of Carmi. Like, yes, he's fighting with everybody else, but really at the root of it, he's fighting himself. He's fighting that unhealthy side of him that's been so dominant for so long, and he's fighting that, and it's manifesting into his relationships with other people. But at the core, like there's a lot of demons that he's also working through. And just jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things I jotted down in the looking ahead section is we've seen some incredible moments with Sid over the past 3 episodes. Amazing. Like she is really stepping up and leading this team in the way that she had always envisioned, her and Carmi envisioned together. There's so many examples of great leadership. But there are these little moments where we see her anxiety and her stress really begin to rise, and she's been resilient enough to keep it at bay and show up for the team. But we know that she's a character that also pushes herself to the limits as well. So honestly, one of my things is like, is Sid okay? And how much is she gonna try to be self-sacrificing and give and give and give to this team, and at the cost of herself or the other ways that she can be her healthiest self too. So there's all of that's in the mix as well. The inter character relationships, but then also the character's relationship with themselves that I think is so interesting. And oftentimes it's at the root source of the relational conflicts and dynamics as well.
Absolutely. Sid is one of my faves, and I'm real nervous for her in this season. And I want her to get out. I'm like, Sid, this is not a good place for you. This is not a healthy restaurant. I know you wanted to build something yourself, but can I introduce you to Chef Terry? Like, she's much better. Y'all would get along great. Like, can we just make that happen instead? Because this is not good for you. So I'm real nervous about Sydney because she looks okay now and she seems to be handling it like a champ, but we all know that she is not okay. Especially the show keeps doing these really, really smart like zoom ins on her face. And man, her face just says it all. And it's like, oh, you're pissed, you're upset, like you are not okay. And so the way that the show keeps dropping those little hints, even though she's trying to keep it all together, I'm a little concerned what's going to happen to our girl.
Yep. And especially too, we end season 2 with her throwing up from the insane amount of stress that she was under after Friends and Family Night was finally complete. And there's that season ended with that. And in a lot of ways, like, we still know that's there, but we haven't really fully dove into it yet. And we are then also getting these close-up punches and shots. And so like there's a lot there that's still, the seeds are planted for something to happen. And man, it's amazing though, like we've mentioned, how in spite of all of that, she is still figuring out how to show up for her team. Like, it's pretty incredible. She herself is stressed. other people are stressed around her, but she's somehow able to still show up for them. That is really hard to do. And she's doing it with such grace and tenderness and um, empathy for really understanding what each person needs. Like, I love that the way that Sydney calms Carmy down looks very different from the way that Sydney calms Tina down. There's a firmness and kind of a calling Carmy up to higher that she does for him that like seems to work really great with him, and he has that respect for her. But that whole scene where she tells him he's clearly about to like lose it, and she just says, "Hey, I need you to be calm right now. I can't babysit you. We got this. Come on, let's go." And it looks very different from what Tina needs. And so that is also fascinating to see, is her really tailoring it to the person on the other end. It's really indicative of what Marcus shared in his eulogy around seeing the other person and knowing exactly what they need versus a blanket approach.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, it's great leadership. Like, she's just putting on a masterclass of how to be a really good leader through really trying times. So, way to go, Sydney. She is too good for the situation that she's in, but she's killing it.
Yep. Okay, any other last big thoughts that we wanted to mention with this episode before we give out some awards?
There's just a couple of things that I wanted to just note that I thought were interesting. We've talked about quite a few times how Natalie has such an affection for Fack, and the way that she is so sweet to him. And I thought it was really interesting in the funeral scene. Fack was sitting behind Sugar, and he had his hand on her shoulder as Marcus was delivering the eulogy. And I just thought that was so sweet to see, because I feel like most of the time we've seen Fack almost like the little kid and Sugar is the mom. And in this moment, we get to see that Fack also has that tender care for Natalie as well. It was just so sweet to see.
I love that you mentioned that. It's such a small little detail, and it's in a long shot panning over each of the characters. But you're so right, for those that are looking for it, that little gesture, that little detail, whether it's, the actors, really understanding their characters, maybe it's a bit of staging and directing, but that little detail says so much. And we've talked about this. The Bear is a show of all of the little details along the way being significant and important and tying together in some larger theme, or some of them have their own little narrative arcs. And so that little detail just said so much too. I love that.
And then another really cool little thing that I wanted to point out is we get to see Ibra doing the sandwiches in this episode, and we see just like how that gets out of control. In the previous episode, Carmy had said that they would open up sandwiches tomorrow, and then we see in this episode the madness around Ibra trying to do sandwiches, presumably by himself. And I wonder if that's another, like, one of these subtle moments of Carmy not thinking sandwiches aren't ready. Also, it's just bananas to be serving sandwiches out of a fine dining restaurant the way that they're doing it, but that's fine. Whatever. Make your own choices. But I wonder if it wasn't ready and they didn't have the staff, or they didn't have the supplies, or they didn't have the process, and like whatever it wasn't ready. And yet he decided to open unilaterally, and now Ibra is trying to stay above water and is struggling. So I wondered if that was a continuation of the thought from the previous episode, and how just another example of Carmy's kind of like off the cuff decisions are affecting really everybody and every part of the business.
Yeah. The disregard for the consequences of the decisions, essentially, which we've seen him do in previous seasons. Just that the stakes were a little bit lower, or the 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 actual coming to fruition of the consequences we just didn't see as much. Like I'm thinking back to that whole negotiation sequence in the early part of season 2 with Carmi, Sydney, and Sugar with Uncle Jimmy. And Carmi just kind of takes over and like doesn't think about the consequences of the terms that they've agreed to and the timelines that they've agreed to. And so it's like we see the roots of where that could come from, but he is now fully on running at a million miles per hour with those sides of himself that maybe were there in the past, but he was collaborative enough and just able to let go of some of those things so that the consequences and the costs of those didn't really come to fruition in the way that they are now. And so we see that his wiring has always been there, but how he chooses to lean in or not lean in, or understand how to wield his strengths well, or be very self-aware about his weaknesses, are really impacting some of his choices now. There's also, I think I forget if it's episode 1 or 2, but someone comes in. I think they're coming in with a delivery for some ingredients and whatnot, and they have a whole conversation around how the regulars are really missing the sandwich shop. And I wonder how that pressure also influenced Carmi's decision, and him kind of, as a leader, not knowing how to make the hard choice of saying, I know that the regulars want it, we will do it, but the timelines are going to be, we need another 2 weeks. But kind of buckling under the pressure of trying to please and retain that customer base, maybe clouding his judgment, or him caving to the pressure of wanting to make sure that that demographic of the bear, or that part of the bear, is still alive and well. And so we're taking shortcuts in other areas in order to fulfill or meet the needs of the people, without understanding what those costs are. And that's part of leadership, is being bold enough to make some of those hard trade-offs and hard choices for the sake of the larger team and for the ultimate success of the business too. A couple bad reviews from the sandwich side that opened too quickly, could really tank your business. And so cutting those corners or caving into pressure really does have quite high stakes.
But Jen, it's vibrant collaboration. Come on.
I love that when Richie brings that table that they're trying to hurry along in. Like, welcome to our oasis of vibrant collaboration. It's literally Carmi yelling at Sid for something. And they both look up and just immediately silence, immediate little bow. Such a fu from Richie to Carmi's great.
Again, it's so good. Richie is so good at annoying the crap out of people. And once he knows what gets under your skin, he's just going to poke at that. And he's just going to do it over and over and over again. And honestly, Carmi is being such a tool right now. I want Richie to keep poking him. Richie, make his life hell, because he's making everybody else's life hell. So you do what you got to do, buddy. I'm not mad at it.
It's oddly satisfying.
Right?
And really fun.
Yeah.
So good.
Especially after this episode, I'm a little I am surprised at where I am at with these characters, because I was so anti-Richie for so long. Mm-hmm. And now I'm to the point where I'm like, Richie, you do what you gotta do, buddy. I'm anti-Carmi right now. So Richie, do your worst, man. This is entertaining. I never thought I'd get here, but now here we are.
I love it. I've always been Team Richie, but his richiness is really shining, really, really shiny indeed. It's part of his EQ too, he's read you well enough to know what you'll get absolutely infuriated at, and we're gonna push that exact button.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
Okay, let's give out some TBNS awards, shall we? So the first category is for Top Chef. Who's getting this award this week?
I gotta give it to Sid. She is stepping up, and she's just trying to care for everybody the best that she can in a very difficult situation. So gotta give it to Sid.
Yep. Yep. My choice is also to Sid for losing her shit less than everyone else somehow.
Yeah.
um, all right. The next category is achievement in chaos. What is going to get this award today?
I want to give it to Fact's attempt at serving the broth dish. It's so good, and yet it's so chaotic. Everything about that is chaos. The dish itself is chaos. Fact's facial expression, trying to process it all, is chaos. His pouring and then removing of the dish, chaos. It's excellent.
There's some other really great shots of him that are really quick later on too, where he's like droning on and on in front of the table and he's pouring the water like 3 inches to the right of the water glass. He's like, well, Carmi loves to visit blah 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 every 2 weeks, and you're just like, no one cares, and also we're spilling everywhere. Oh, it's so good,
man.
I am going to give this award this week to there's a tiny scene where Sugar's talking to, I think probably Uncle Jimmy in one of the back rooms, and she's drinking water out of a giant Tupperware container. And I just it's like that's when we know we don't have time to find proper glassware.
No, I love it. Honestly, those Tupperwares, good for so many different things. I'm not mad at it.
So good. Okay, the next category is spiciest line. Who's getting this award?
Yeah, I wanted to give it to Richie for this item on his non-negotiable list, which is joy. Just in general. That's very actionable. It's easy.
That's mine too.
Yes.
Oh, it's so
amazing.
Good. Yeah, joy, just in general. Oh, it's so good. Okay, looking ahead, what are you hoping to see for our fam in the next episode 4?
Okay, and we've already mentioned this, but I want to see a Sydney Chef Terry team up of some sort. I like the idea of those two together. They seem to have like similar vibes, similar personality. And so I wonder if like that could be a good pairing. And I want Sid to be okay. I'm real nervous about Sydney. And then I'm excited to see how Richie continues to just poke at Carmi. And then I'm very curious about Uncle Jimmy and his continued presence. And I want to see how the financial situation of the restaurant is going to continue to add stress, especially as Nat is going to give birth very soon, it would appear. And so how is her departure and how she's holding so many things together? How could that potentially lead to disaster for the restaurant as well? So there's just, I feel like the show is setting up a lot of possibilities of train wrecks. And I'm just trying to keep an eye on like, okay, which one do I think is going to hit first?
And how will this train veering off course hit the other train that is also veering off course? Yeah. We've got like 17
good
different
domino
trains.
effect.
Yes. All barreling towards the same direction.
Yes.
The tracks will collide at some point. Well, one of the ones that I mentioned earlier was like, is it okay? We need to check in with our girl. Yeah, there's some things cooking there. I would love to see more of Sweeps' sommelier journey. I think he's just fascinating. There's some little nods there. I don't know if the show will give us more of that detail because there's like a million other things happening, but I am personally just curious. So I want to see what he brings to this team. He's been with the front of house crew with Fac and with Richie, and he's such a different personality from the rest of this group, and you need that in group dynamics. And so I'm just fascinated to see how he balances out or also is able to potentially bring people together or be there for, one of the characters in a moment where they need it most. So just fascinating to see what he brings to the dynamic, this very chaotic group dynamic. And then similar in nature but slightly different is Marcus is on such a roller coaster personally right now. But one thing that's been always, one of the theses of the bear is just how much everything that you experience is um, able to help push you to really grow and empathize and connect with people, or you can run and isolate and disengage from the community, disengage from the family. And oftentimes, some of these characters' best moments with each other have been when they've hit low points. Like we saw Richie hit a low point, and how Carmi's previous times experiencing similar, questions and doubting, it really helped them connect deeply, and they could support each other and encourage each other in such meaningful ways. And so what great moments will come from Marcus's battles right now with having to grieve the loss of his mom? How does he help infuse bigger perspective or real connection in this group that needs it most right now? Or maybe he goes in an unhealthy direction, and it's something about the relationship with him and Carmi that can really draw him out of that place, that also helps Carmi grow. So I think that the Bears has always been so intentional about showcasing how our own growth journeys often aren't done in isolation, and they both can be encouragement to other people, but also we need other people speaking that into our lives as well. And so Marcus is going through so much, and this this team is growing through so much. How will those things collide and fuel each other or help each other as well? So I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by that as well.
Yes, Marcus, where are we gonna go?
Hmm.
How you have some choices ahead of you. How are we going to handle some really difficult things that he's going through? Also, can we just say, because we did not talk about his eulogy, but his eulogy was so heartbreaking, but also just like heartwarming at the same time. And it was the typical
Marcus.
Marcus
Mm-hmm.
beauty with Zen, but with sorrow. Like, I just phenomenal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh. Such an incredibly like engrossing scene, and perfectly indicative of this character who we just adore. So, yeah, I'm curious to see Marcus's trajectory as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so good. And the acting in that scene is incredible.
Oh,
It's the
yes.
camera lingers in him for like several minutes, and that's always hard to do. And to hold that attention, to really soak in that moment, and the acting in that scene really takes it home for us. It's so him too, which I think is just really smart of the writing of the show. It's exactly how Marcus would deliver that eulogy, what he would focus on, the little details, but also these big ideas, all woven together with such simplicity. And there's like you mentioned, a zenness, a groundedness about him that is so comforting, so comforting. And we get that as our moose bouche before we get launched into the experience that is the rest of this episode.
It's the saddest amuse bouche that you will ever consume in your whole life,
Yeah. It's
but
also
it's
the
also
most
perfect.
misleading one, too. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's take a moment to breathe, to feel, to be quiet, to be reflective. And then, by the way, plates are falling, sauces
Mhm.
everywhere. Everything is
Yeah.
going wrong. Yep.
But I do appreciate how this episode ramps up, because obviously like we start with quiet, somber, heartfelt eulogy scene, and then we go into the month of service, and like for a little while it's kind of okay, like it's not great, but like the further that you get into the episode, the more insane it gets. And so in those last few seconds where it's just that really really quick montage at the end, and just the constant repetition of doors before the clock strikes 11 is just insane. And I love that progression that we go on, because like yeah, there's stress all throughout, but we go from 0 to 100 over the course of the episode, and just the brilliant pacing of that is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And shout out to the editing. It's something that I jotted down in my notes but didn't get a chance to talk about yet. But just quick shout out to the editing because it is doing the most. It is keeping that tension, that chaos, the past showcasing the passage of time too, which is so smartly done. The way that it cuts together, Sid saying some of the same dish names in succession, but then the menus change, so the side of the glaze is slightly different, and showcasing that progression, the constant theme of doors, showcasing another night of chaos has ensued yet again, and also like what it must have felt like for these characters, just this kind of whirlwind, this fever dream of nights that have made up their past month that all kind of blend together too. Like this is probably what their recollection of this 30-day experience was like, is this episode.
Also, just shout out to anyone who works in a restaurant at any capacity.
Yep.
Wow. Just wow. Like,
Yep.
I did some meal prepping today, and that was torture for me. And so I am just, especially after watching this episode, just what a nice insight into the stamina that it takes to be a cook, a chef, to be doing the dishes, to be running back of house, to be running the front of house, to being a servant, like all of these different things that go into running a restaurant, and the stamina that you have to have and the dedication that you have to do it well. Just wow. Incredible.
Yeah, so true. So true. And it's something that's the show is constantly, I think, shedding light on is the world of the culinary arts and the service industry, how much care and attention goes into it, how there's just so much complexity to it. There's so much more to it than people probably even understand. And you can tell that this show is made by people that love culinary arts, the food industry, serving people, taking care of people. There's always that thread line throughout a lot of this. And we get to see all that goes into the behind the scenes. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of episode 3 of season 3 of The Bear. You can find it available on Hulu. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Bear Season 3. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 3. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at tvnuspod, or you can email us at tvnuspod@gmail.com. We will be back very soon, in a couple of days, to discuss episode 4. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.